Welcome to the Bourbon Van. I'm Phil. It's Whiskey in the Van Wednesday. Buffalo Trace Month continues, and today Norman and I will be trying two wheated bourbons from Weller. So this line is named for W.L. Weller, also known as William LaRue Weller. Buffalo Trace claims that William LaRue Weller pioneered the use of wheat instead of rye in his bourbons. That claim has been disputed over the years, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. The Weller line features Buffalo Trace's wheated mash bill. While this line wasn't always hotly pursued by bourbon enthusiasts, when it was revealed that Weller 12 likely contains the same juice that goes into the famed and revered Pappy Van Winkle product, that changed everything. The two bottles we're going to try today didn't just used to be affordable, they used to be readily available before all that Pappy madness happened. These days they tend to leap off shelves as soon as they arrive, and they are not readily available in any sense of the word. The first bottle we're going to try today is Weller's Special Reserve. Depending on who you ask, this one is aged between 4 and 7 years. It is bottled at 90 proof and it sells for $30 here in Oregon. Although if you find it in liquor stores across the country, especially where they're marking things way up, that $30 can really quickly turn into $50 or $60 or even more. Off the top, I want to make it clear that I've not always been a fan of wheated bourbons. Weller Special Reserve historically is the one that I've always liked the best, so I guess I have bougie tastes. Let's get to the nose because I'm looking forward to drinking one of the few sub 100 proof wheated bourbons that I don't actively dislike. As with all Buffalo Trace products, one of the strange things is no matter what the mash bill contains, whether it's wheat, whether it's rye, whether it's their bourbon, whether it's any of their products, I feel like you can smell that Buffalo Trace nose. There's something very familiar about it. Honey, vanilla, caramel, it's all sweetness up front. Along with the oak, this is all pretty typical of wheated bourbons. They're just generally sweeter on the nose than a rye bourbon, which is going to be spicier. There's not a lot more to say on the nose for this one, so let's get to the palate. Cheers. And just like the Buffalo Trace bourbon, what you smell is what you get on the palate. It's very similar to the aroma. It has an incredibly gentle mouthfeel. There's a very gentle spice to it. It is viscous, it is creamy, the texture is fantastic. There's nothing offensive about this. Vanilla, caramel, honey, oak, maybe the slightest hint of a red raspberry. It is incredibly likable. Let's have another sip and then we'll get to the finish. Again, what you smelled on the nose came through on the palate, comes through on the finish. There might be a tiny bit of a citrus zest here. Vanilla, light brown sugar, honey, maybe some caramel. And then the surprise here is where the oak comes through and washes that all away. Considering it's not aged for all that long, there is a really nice oak presence here. I don't think I've ever met anybody that didn't like this whiskey. It is easy to drink, it is easy to like, and unfortunately, it is not easy to find. If you do see a bottle of this and you haven't had it and it's not priced to Kingdom Come, I do highly recommend this bottle. It's one of my all-time favorites, and it's one of Julie's all-time favorites. If she wasn't busy doing other things today, she would be right here drinking this whiskey. Before we start talking about the Antique 107, I want to talk about the value of this bottle and comparable bottles, because at that $30 price point, my whiskey's gone. So Julie's in the house. She's just busy. That's what happens when Julie's in the house. My wheated bourbon disappears. It's good. Thief. So before my whiskey was stolen, what I was trying to say is that $30 and even cheaper sometimes, this Weller Special Reserve is a solid value. It's a good bottle of whiskey. And there are plenty of wheated bourbons that compete directly with this bottle, and those are almost entirely more readily available. Maker's Mark, their standard offering, and Larceny from Heaven Hill, those generally sell for a little less, and they are suitable replacements, though honestly, I don't think either one of them truly holds a candle to this Weller product. There are others out there though, such as Wyoming Whiskey. We haven't tried that yet, but we hear good things about it. There are other wheated bourbons being released all the time, so the special in Special Reserve seems to be getting less special, but in my opinion, still a solid bottle, still worth pursuing. If you see it around, if it's on a shelf and you're lucky to get it for MSRP, grab that bottle. In my opinion, in the sub 90 proof wheated bourbon world, this is still the gold standard. Next up is Weller's Antique 107 product. It's aged for about 6 to 8 years, depending on who you ask. Bottled at 107 proof, of course, and it sells for $50 here in Oregon. 107 is a bit of a weird proof point. I don't think that there's another whiskey that I'm familiar with that has 107 as a proof point, but here we go. Let's get right to the nose. So this is considerably more complex. I actually don't know that I would recognize this as a Buffalo Trace product if I didn't see the bottle that it came out of. Unlike the Special Reserve and even the Sazerac Rye, those are pretty recognizable. The Taylor line, you generally recognize a Buffalo Trace product on the nose. This one, it's not necessarily that way. It's pretty unusual and complex. The vanilla and oak that you expect from a Weller product are still there, but it's now accompanied by raisins. There's cinnamon, there's caramel again, as you would expect. Wheated bourbons tend to have a nice caramel note, especially on the nose. On the back end, there's black licorice. I would normally say star anise, but this is sweeter than that. This is more like black licorice to me. Maybe a black jelly bean. I love jelly beans. After those really gentle, lovely aroma notes on the Special Reserve, this comes across almost brash. It's almost aggressive. And again, we're talking 17 proof points here, so that's not a huge surprise. This is a pretty big step up in proof. Let's get to the palate for this one. It's very spicy. There's a ton of cinnamon right up front here. Not offensive cinnamon, although that Kentucky hug is bubbling up pretty quickly right now. As the spice dies down, you get that really nice kick of sugar and raisins. There's some oak that shows up, and once again, when you compare it to the Special Reserve, this one's really loud on the palate. It just brings tons more to the nose and to the palate, and that's not going to appeal to everybody, but the flavors are so much bigger, they are really hard to miss. Let's have another sip and see what else we find. More of the same as we take some more sips here. The sweetness is fantastic on this bottle. This is flavorful. It has spice that's not overwhelming. The sweetness is there, but it's not this cloying, weird sweetness or that weird spice you sometimes get from wheat. This is well balanced and incredibly flavorful. Now checking out the finish, there's vanilla, there's a little caramel, there is oak. Everything as you sip gets a little washed away by that cinnamon. The cinnamon is what hangs around, and it hangs around for a long time. It is a really nice finish, but the cinnamon that continually builds, that's not my personal favorite. I don't dislike it. It's just a tiny knock that I personally have against this particular bottle. So this bottle gets a lot of love, and I think it's rightly deserved. If this one hits your palate, it's a great bottle. In my mind, it's a little spicy. It drinks a little hot. It's not my favorite whiskey, although at 107 proof for a wheated bourbon, this one could be a lot more offensive. It's still fairly easy drinking. So in my personal opinion, I prefer the Special Reserve to the Antique 107. I know that's an unpopular opinion, so be it. Once again, we have to talk comparable bottles, we have to talk value. This one at $50 for 107 proof, as rare as it is, if you find it at that MSRP, not too shabby. If you see this bottle for $100 or more, or cranked way up on secondary in terms of pricing, personally, I would walk away. So there aren't a ton of comparable bottles, at least not at that 100 to 110 proof point. You've got things like Larceny Barrel Proof. You've got things like Maker's Mark Cask Strength. My whiskey's gone again. Larceny Barrel Proof, Maker's Mark Cask Strength, those immediately come to mind. They are very different products. They do have a similar price tag, but they feature wildly different flavor profiles. I do really enjoy Larceny Barrel Proof, $50 per bottle, and I hear that the latest batch, the A121 batch that just came out, is stellar. We have not had that one yet. That one's 112 proof. Previous batches have been considerably hotter than that, so that's not even a one-to-one comparison. And the Maker's Mark Cask Strength, the Maker's 46 cask strength, those cost a little more, they're very different. It's just hard to find a comparable bottle, and that's where I'm gonna need your help. Let me know, what are you getting instead of Antique 107 when you can't find it? What do you prefer to this bottle? Because that wheated bourbon category is starting to expand a little bit. We haven't gone down that road much, so we would love your recommendations. Let us know, instead of Antique 107, what are you drinking? What do you prefer? Because in my mind, as long as Larceny Barrel Proof continues to show up on more and more shelves and is getting to be more available, I know it's not widely available yet, but as long as that one starts showing up more and more, I do think that seeing this 107 bottle on secondary at insane prices is a value that continues to get worse and worse. As much as I enjoy Antique 107, I think it's a fine product. I think it's very tasty. It's not something that I would go out of my way to purchase or spend a ton of money on secondary for. It's good for what it is. If you see it, you haven't tried it, or if you like it, absolutely buy it at MSRP or a little over, but that's not one that I can recommend going wild on. Well, I've tracked down a random glass of whiskey here. I'm actually not sure what's in this, but I'm interested in your thoughts. So let us know in the comments, are you chasing these bottles or are you buying something off the shelf instead of these? Wheated bourbon wise, Tell us about something that we haven't had yet, Wyoming whiskey or otherwise. We don't pursue a lot of wheated bourbons. I think we're seeing more and more distillers expand into that market. I'm really curious to see where it's going to go and who makes the best ones. So give us that recommendation on wheated whiskey. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Look us up on Instagram at The Bourbon Van. And from wherever we are to wherever you are, cheers. How was that, buddy?